Okay, good morning. Welcome to this morning's webinar, in which we're going to cover the somewhat unhappy topic of redundancies. So you'll have seen hopefully some of our previous webinars dealing with furlough leave. Now we're into that process. We're looking at the inevitable exit from that process, and unfortunately for a lot of employers, we're going to be looking at redundancies and restructuring their business. And so this morning's webinar is to cover those situations where you need to make some redundancies but fewer than 20. We'll do a separate webinar on those situations where you need to make more than 20, as there are different rules dealing with that. So let me get my slides up. Super. So there we go. So as I say, this is for those where we're looking at fewer than 20 redundancies. Now, the key to any redundancy process is preparation. For understandable reasons, employers who have got to the point of deciding to make people redundant are under a lot of pressure and want to make decisions quickly. Once the decision is made, let's move, let's get it done. But that is where employers tend to trip themselves up, because they rush into it without doing the necessary preparatory work. So the first port of call is, of course, to work out, well, look, what could this potentially cost? How much cash do you have in the bank? And what are these redundancies going to cost? Because you're going to find yourself in real difficulty if you are trying to make redundancies, but you can't afford to pay the redundancy pay. So you'll see on the screen there a very brief and very simplistic table. You may need to add additional elements to it, but employee name, start date, notice pay, redundancy pay, and holiday pay as at date X, let's say 1st of June, just for argument's sake. And work that out for every single employee within the business. Even those you don't intend to make redundant, work it out so that you've got those figures you can role play and come up with some ideas as to what this might cost you going forward. And that is a key step lots of employers skip or only undertake later in the day, because actually you work out what those redundancy payments are. They're often rather scary figures. You then need to reflect on what your business needs. What is your business going to need going forward? Of course, that's a hugely difficult task at the moment, possibly impossible for some people, but you've got to make the best fist of it you can. And you've got to look at things like what are the skill sets that you will require? How many people are you going to need, perhaps in each area of your business? What vacancies do you currently have? Actually, having assessed the skill sets, do you need more people to in team A than you currently have, and less people in team B? Can you move those from B to A? Are their skills interchangeable? Maybe they are, maybe they aren't, but again, you need to be looking at that, because that could save you a lot of money in terms of redundancies, potential recruitment costs into the team that needs new people. So have a look through that and be a little bit hard-nosed about what do you actually need. We then move on to the start process, really, of the redundancy proper, and that is identifying the pool of employees. Now, what do we mean by pool? Well, that is the group of employees who you wish to place at risk. So if you have vacancies in team A, you're not going to be placing them at risk, but if you have too many people in team B, your pool may well be team B. The pool can be shaped by things like seniority, levels of experience, things like that. So each one will be slightly different, and you need to just take care to make sure that you group the individuals together correctly. You then need to tie into the skills required assessment that you undertook on right at the very beginning to create a preliminary selection criteria. Now, you do need to consult on your selection criteria, so it can't be an absolute, but you should have a fair idea of the skills and qualifications that you require. There are then obvious additional criteria such as absences, lateness, disciplinary outcomes, things like that. But the key ones need to be the skills that you need, the experiences that you need to get the right people going forward. And you could be looking at anything sort of 10, 12, 15 different criteria at this stage. We then need to reflect on those who have less than 2 years service, and there's a separate webinar dealing with this, so I won't go into too much detail. But those with less than 2 years service generally do not have protection from unfair dismissal. You don't need to go through any process to remove them, and they have no right to a redundancy payment. So they are about as cheap to make redundant as it is possible to have. The key issue with this, though, is that there is a tendency to knee-jerk into those. Oh, well, if they don't have protection from unfair dismissal, if they can't sue us, let's make them redundant. But if they're the ones with the key skill sets, the key qualifications, the key client relationships or customer relationships, maybe they're not the key candidates. So they should certainly be the ones you consider first when you put your grid together and you work out who those people are. But that you shouldn't be knee-jerking into moving these people on if they are the people you in fact need. Once you've identified the pool, once you've dealt with those for less than 2 years service who can just be notified and moved on, we then move into the process proper. You start by notifying the pool or the pools that they are at risk of redundancy. Most employers will do this by way of sort of a mass meeting of the entire pool. Obviously, circumstances at the moment may preclude that, so it may need to be an individual phone call. But you notify them they're at risk. You then send them a letter confirming their at-risk status, and then within that, you also give an overview of why you're proposing the redundancy. Obviously, at the moment, it tends to be COVID-19, the impact on the business. We've lost 25%, 50% of our revenues, etc., something along those lines. It doesn't need to be particularly lengthy, but it kick-starts the consultation process and explains to the employees why this has happened. You then move into individual consultation meetings. So remember, this is for fewer than 20 redundancies. You meet with each of the individuals personally. Yeah, that may need to be remotely via Zoom or Teams or something like that to discuss the situation. Now, the purpose of these meetings is to try and find a way to avoid compulsory redundancy. So there are a number of ways you can do that. Things like voluntary redundancy. Maybe they're coming up to retirement and would quite like a final payoff. Moving them to another role, back to the vacancies in another team option. It could be that they agree to a job share for a period of time. There are lots of potential opportunities there to explore. Obviously, individual circumstances will dictate how viable some of those are, but they're worth reflecting upon. And you would normally have at least one, but sometimes 2, 3, occasionally even more consultation meetings with the employees to review what they've said and to try and find a way, as I say, to avoid compulsory redundancies. Obviously, if you can, great, implement it, everybody moves on and the redundancy process comes to an end, at least for that individual. If not, then we're looking at having to make a decision who is to be made compulsory redundant. And you do that by applying selection criteria. So we've already identified the selection criteria, or at least a large scale of selection criteria. Following the consultation meetings, we may have whittled that down. We do need to consult with the employees on the selection criteria. That doesn't mean that we have to agree with them what the criteria are, but we do need to let them have their say on whether it's appropriate, and they may have some useful insights that could help. Once you've finalized the selection criteria, you need to apply scoring to those criteria. You should be as objective as you possibly can. It's not always easy, so we'd recommend having a second manager also score. Again, not always possible depending on the size of your business. It's a nice to have, it's not a must have. But if you are scoring, try and make sure it's objective as possible, and ultimately, if you've created the correct criteria, identifying the correct skills, you should get the right people going forward. You would then identify those who have scored least well. So let's say you're looking to make 5 redundancies, you then call the bottom or lowest scoring 5 from your criteria to a further consultation meeting. That meeting would discuss any changes in circumstances. Maybe there have been a couple of volunteers since, and so you can look to transfer them over to another team. But then, if assuming not, you would be discussing the scores, making sure there's no potentially hidden issues there. For example, if you scored them particularly low on attendance because they've had a lot of sickness absence, if they confide in you that actually they were undertaking medical examinations for a disability, you may need to revise that score on that criteria, and that may be enough to elevate them up higher in the list. And in doing that, you avoid a disability discrimination claim. So it is an important step. Obviously, at that point, employers are often feeling, well, we've done the criteria, we've decided, we've been objective, what's the issue? Well, let's just hear what else they have to say. Following that meeting, then you would confirm the dismissal. Now, you can do that in person, but most employers prefer to do that by way of a letter. Even if you do dismiss in person, you need to follow it up with a letter explaining that they've been made redundant, the date it will apply from, what the rationale and the reasons were. Again, it doesn't need to be War and Peace, it doesn't have to be a long letter, but you do need to set that up for them. You also need to give them the right to appeal, and if they do take that right, you would need to hold a further meeting with them, an appeal meeting with them, and then confirm the outcome of that appeal in writing. We then move to what do they get paid? Well, obviously it will be somewhat dictated by what they're entitled to in their contract, but as a general rule, it's their salary to the date of dismissal, it's their notice pay, it's their redundancy pay, and it's any accrued but untaken holiday. There may be some additional payments due to them under their contract, in which case those need to be paid as well. And that's really it. That's a redundancy process. So it is a bit time consuming and emotionally it's a hard thing for lots of employers to do. But if you get the preparatory work done and you get the criteria ready, you know what it's going to cost you, you know what your skill set requirements are going forward, actually the process then does tend to go far more smoothly than if you sort of leap into it without having done that work. So I hope that was a useful oversight on redundancy. If you are planning on making redundancies, or if you have any questions or queries or require any further information, you'll see my contact details on the screen. Please do contact me. Thank you.